Welcome to episode 61 of No Rares Required, a weekly podcast where I go over the commons and uncommons that make up the majority of the cards that you will see during a draft. And every week I discuss a strategy to a specific color pair or archetype, and this week Orzhov or white-black won the vote. And I think the archetype's theme should be called Orzhov Removal. But it's the theme on MTGA is actually sacrifice, and it was a little bit of a whiff. So at the time of this recording, it has a 52.7% win rate, which is the second worst archetype on 17 lands. Rakdos is taking a last place trophy. And I do think that this can be used to our advantage, though, because if we do avoid the traps that are causing the archetype to be a bottom performer, I and members of my Discord community have had great success with the archetype. So I think you'll want to focus on the flyers in white. The flyers in white removal in white and in black, and then anything that helps the small game, like the cards that give you like the double advantage, so Fanatical Offering, Another Chance, the Skullcap Snail, anything that can kind of trade, give you that card advantage, I think is really where the Orzhov space shines. And then you'll want to trade 1-for-1 with your opponent's resources. And so cards like Deathcap Marionette work pretty well, although I think there is a little bit less of a benefit off of the self-mill than in the Golgari space. And as always with black, you're going to want to keep your eyes out for Deep Cavern Bat and Chupacabra Echo. And I do think you'll want to favor black just slightly, a little bit more than white. It really depends on how many flyers you're going to see, right? Like, white is primarily made up for the flyers, and but if you can be majority black, then that's better because of the double pips. And remember to hit like and subscribe for near daily Magic the Gathering content. This has been a wonderful year, so I just wanted to wish you all a happy holiday and a happy new year. And remember to come visit YouTube if you want to place a vote for next week's archetype. We've got 3 left before the next set. So with that, let's dive into the cards individually, and we've got a fair amount to go through this week. So, and also when I think you should be taking them during a draft. Okay, so first I like to calculate the total wins created, and if this is your first time kind of seeing my technique, what I do is I take the average of the games played win rate and the games in hand win rate on 17 lands, which is a site that tracks data of Magic the Gathering users, and then I subtract the average win rate of all of the users in that archetype specifically and multiply it by the numbers of games played. And what this does is it allows me to sift through the data and figure out what are the cards that are most impactful to the archetype. And so these are the ones that are being played the most, not just impacting it the most positively, if that makes sense. So top of the list, we've got Alltech Cloud Guard, which is the 3/2 flyer that spawns a 1/1. Deep Cavern Bat, which is the 1/1 lifelink that looks at your opponent's hand and you get to take something. Miner's Guidewing is the 1/1 that explores when it dies with flying for 1. Tithing Blade is the Edict as an artifact that flips into the artifact that drains your opponent for 1 damage. Fanatical Offering is the one where you sacrifice and create a map token and draw. Clay-Fired Bricks lets you look for planes, and then it switches into +1/+1 for your board and spawns 2 1/1 gnomes. Skullcap Snail makes your opponent discard a card. Runelurker Bat is the 1/1 lifelink in white. Spring-Loaded Sawblades is the deal 5 that flips into the vehicle. Join the Dead is -5/-5 or -10/-10 if you've descended with the double pip black removal at common. Tinker's Tote is 3 cards in 1. It gives you an artifact that you can sacrifice to gain 3 life and 2 1/1s. Another Chance, which does some self-mill and then brings 2 creature cards back from your graveyard to your hand. Aklazot's Deepest Betrayal, which is the busted black mythic that is a flying lifelink creature that becomes a land and then comes back if you or your opponent is hellbent. Sanguine Evangelist, which is the 2/1 that spawns a 1/1 bat when it comes in and then when it dies as well with Battlecry. And then Preacher of the Schism, which is the 2/4 Death Touch that either draws you a card and you lose a life or creates a 1/1 lifelink vampire, I believe. So then we can do the same thing with the total wins destroyed, and these are the ones that are like the trap cards. These are the reason. This is the reason right here that the archetype has not been doing well. So I do believe that if you avoid these cards, one of the things that's nice is that, like, because a lot of people will use 17 lands data and they'll look at like what archetypes are not doing very well, they'll avoid those archetypes, right? And I think that if you go into those archetypes specifically with the knowledge of what is making those archetypes not do well, you can exploit a very underdrafted space. And so I think this is what you should be trying to do if you do find yourself in a draft where nobody's appreciating the black cards at the table. So top of the list is Broodrage Mycoid, which is the 4/3 for 4 that, or yeah, I think it's a 4/3 for 4 that spawns a 1/1 if you descended. Acolyte of Aclazots, which is the 1/4 that can tap to sacrifice a creature. Deep Goblin Skulltaker, which is the 2/2 menace that gets +1/+1, a counter if you've descended. And Vito's Inquisitor, which is the one that you can sacrifice to put a +1/+1 counter onto Vito's Inquisitor. And this is similar to Rakdos. Like, this is a card that looked like it was specifically designed for this space. And so the fact that it's not doing well is kind of what I mean by like the sacrifice theme that the design team had made ended up not working quite as well. So I think this is one of the cards that's really affecting the win rate of the archetype. Grasping Shadows is the enchantment that if you attack alone, you get Death Touch and Lifelink, and then it switches into a land that can let you play things from your graveyard, I think, if I remember. Caparocti Sunborn is the 4/4, the Boros card, the Boros uncommon, that allows you to discover, so it's a splash. Glorifier of Suffering, which is another one that, like, same as Inquisitor, is doing the sacrifice thing specifically. So it's a 3/2 that if you sacrifice something, you get to put 2 +1/+1 counters on your board. And Glorifier of Suffering is, I thought it looked good. Like, if you're sacrificing a map token to put a 2 +1/+1 counters, that should be good, right? Theoretically. But nothing supports that it actually does well. And every time that my opponent plays it, it hasn't been impressive. Even when you have like a whole bunch of white flyers, I think the Glorifier of Suffering is best in that situation, but still underwhelming. And that's how important rectangles are in the set. So the theme that is sacrificing those rectangles has to be very careful about the price that they're paying. Abuelo's Awakening is the rare white that lets you go and find something from your graveyard and put it into play. And then Pakal Thousandth Moon is the Boros rare that spawns gnomes and grows in size. Hunter's Blowgun, which is the one that gives you reach or death touch, colorless equipment with a equip cost of 2. Autoclan Landmark, which is the scry artifact that turns into a 1/4 flyer that can give other things flyer. Chimil the Inner Sun, which is the colorless mythic, I believe, that discovers 5 at the end of your turn. Canonized in Blood, which is so bad I can't even remember what it does. Not an impressive black enchantment, if I remember. Adaptive Gem Guard, which is the 3/3 Hill Giant in white that can tap 2 artifacts or creatures to put a +1/+1 counter on it. Abuelo Ancestral Echo, which is the Azorius or blue-white that can blink things, and then a Braid, which is the common red removal or destroy artifact. So looking over this list, you can kind of, take away a couple of things. The archetype is not splashing particularly well. The fact that Chimil the Inner Sun is not doing particularly well in this archetype kind of points to you want the game to be over sooner rather than later. Chimil does better the longer the game goes, the more that it can continue to discover. I also don't think you're going to have as many great threats to hit with Chimil. Is another thing, is that, like, what 5-drops are you trying to hit? And the black-white space doesn't have as much of that. It has more of those, like, if you play Chimil and you flip over a Skullcap Snail when your opponent has no cards in hand, it's kind of underwhelming, right? So you've got a lot of little 2-drops in this archetype that don't work particularly well with Chimil. And and you should avoid the the theme of actually trying to sacrifice your artifacts. So after doing that, I like to get a little bit deeper and what I do is I take those wins created and I divide them by the number of times that the card was picked, and graph it against the average taken at, or ATA, and fit the data with a logarithmic regression. And then I calculate the distance of the card to the fitted line, which, thanks to Carl, aka 2duck Cubed, we'll call value over replacement. And this allows me to see which are the top cards to take at different time points within a draft. And the top of the list, we've got Achalazot's Deepest Betrayal, which is the Bat God, the 4/4 flying lifelink for 5. That whenever it attacks, each opponent discards a card. For each opponent who can't, you draw a card. Whenever an opponent discards a land, you create a 1/1 back token, and then it switches into the Temple of the Dead if it dies. And you end up with being able to transform the Temple of the Dead into the Bat God if a player has one or fewer cards in hand and only as a sorcery. So the fact that it makes your opponent discard and the fact that it's just later in the game, the chances of being able to reanimate this is very easy, right? And this is a really good reason to head into the black space if you open up this. The other reason to be Orzhov specifically is Veto, Fanatic of Achalazot's. Doesn't perform very well in other archetypes. It's not a set where splashing is particularly easy to do. So Veto is kind of an Orzhov superstar. You get a 4/4 flyer for 4 that whenever you sacrifice a permanent, you gain 2 life. If you sacrifice another one, your opponent loses 2 life. And if you're able to accomplish 3 sacrifices in one turn, then you get a 4/3 vampire demon creature with flying. So this is definitely one of those cards that you can build around if you open it up in pack 1, pick 1, and you want to just focus on this. This is one of the only reasons to lean heavily into the archetypes theme of pick up everything with sacrifice. If you go back and you look at my draft skeleton at the beginning of the video, I did choose Veto, Fanatic of Achalazot's, but I did not lean heavily into it. I do not believe that you need to. A 4/4 flyer for 4 is perfectly fine. And the fact that it gains you additional life whenever you're sacrificing things off of Fanatical Offering or sacrificing your Tinkering Totes and things like that. I don't think you need to hit the 3 to be able to get the 4/3. And I think that you can hurt yourself if you go too far down that road. So the choice is yours, though, right? Preacher of the Schism has been a top performing black rare that we've talked about a fair amount. 2/4 Death Touch that either makes a 1/1 vampire with lifelink or draws you a card and you lose a life, depending on what your opponent's life total is. And if you're tied, it does both. The Sanguine Evangelist, the 2/1 with Battle Cry, when it enters the battlefield or dies, create a 1/1 black bat creature token with flying. And especially with the attacking your opponent's resources and trading 1 for 1, Sanguine Evangelist works well with the kind of go wide. And I do think that because of the Discover mechanic in red, we actually see kind of a switch. So Rakdos is usually the place of removal, and Orzhov is usually more of the place of the go wide. And or at least white is usually the more go wide color, and it's switched around the set because of the Discover mechanic being in red. And so I think Rakdos is a little bit more of the small game go wide, whereas the Orzhov is more of the just really removal heavy archetype. And we've got the Unstable Glyph Bridge and the Sandswirl Wanderglyph, the Wrath of the set that gives you a creature as well. By this point in the set, I think you guys have all experienced being glyph bridged and glyph bridging your opponent. It's a very powerful card. When you cast it, each player chooses a creature with power 2 or less, and then you destroy all of the creatures except the ones chosen that way. And then it switches into a 5/3 flyer that your opponent either can play spells or attack you. They can't do both. We've got the Starving Revenant, which is a 4/4 for 4 when it enters the battlefield, Surveil 2. And then for each card that you keep on the top of your library, you then draw and then lose 3 life. So it's Surveil 2, but you can pay to get those cards into your hand. And then you've also got Descend 8. And whenever you draw a card, if there are 8 or more permanent cards in your graveyard, target opponent loses 1 life and you gain 1 life. And so this one works particularly well in the kind of attrition deck, and you can go a very controlling way with Orzhov, which is why I was a little bit surprised to see Chamil, the Inner Sun, not working particularly well. but like I said, it kind of makes sense with the cheap threats that you're running. Starving Revenant, though, if you do have a long game and you get to that Descend 8, kind of acts as a miniature Shieldred. And then we've got the Resplendent Angel, which is a 3/3 flyer. At the beginning of each instep, if you gained 5 or more life this turn, create a 4/4 white angel creature token with flying and vigilance. And especially with Tinker's Totes and Veto, you, I think, are more likely to be able to actually cheese out the 5 life before being able to hit the self pump with the 3 triple pip of white that gives +2/+2 in lifelink. So if you have Veto in play and you sacrifice a Totes, you gain the 5 life, right? So you don't need to do the 6. So there's a route there, and there's same thing with the Echo of Dusk. Echo of Dusk is a common that we'll cover later that can get lifelink in this archetype, and because of there's very limited amounts of life gain in this set. Orzhov, I think, is the space where Resplendent Angel does the best. And then these are all, who cares what rares you like? The rare stuff is less important because you're going to pick the rares that you open, right? It's more about, like, if you open up a rare, knowing which archetype to try to take that rare into, but not to force it. If you're, it's definitely an art form in draft, how to navigate a draft. This spot, I think, is more useful for navigation. This is the, like, picks 2.5 through 5 are what uncommons are you looking to open that should lead you into that archetype. And top of the list here, we've got Deep Cavern Bat, the 1/1 flying lifelink that attacks your opponent's hands so that they have to use interaction. I've talked about this one a lot. This is a fantastic card and has been seeing play in Constructed. Chupacabra Echo, which is a 3/2 that, as long as you've, like, Fathomly Descended, you get -X to one of your opponent's creatures, where X is the number of permanents in your graveyard. So this is kind of one of those payoffs to having the Deathcap Marionettes that there's not a whole lot of Descend payoffs in this space, but Chupacabra Echo is one of them. And then the Oltec Cloud Guard, which is the 3/2 flyer that spawns a 1/1, is the top performer of the total wins created. This is one of those cards that is a common, and but you can take it like it is an uncommon. And then Clayfired Bricks, the Anthem, you get to gain 2 life and, search your library for a Plains card. And then on 7, you get to flip over 2 1/1 colorless gnome artifact creature tokens and give everything +1/+1. So the more that you have flyers, the more that you're going to be able to gum up the board with those 1/1s and chump block, while your flyers all get +1/+1 and push damage. So Ruin Lurker Bat is another uncommon to look for. It's a 1/1 flying lifelink that if you've descended, you get to scry 1. Spring-Loaded Sawblades, which is removal and a threat all in one. So you get a flash artifact that deals 5 damage to target tapped creature, and then it can craft with an artifact for 3 and a white into a 5/5 vehicle that has crew 1, or you can crew it with untapped artifacts. You can turn it into an artifact creature if you tap 2 untapped artifacts. And then lastly, we've got Join the Dead. And Join the Dead is one of those that doesn't usually make the value of a replacement list. If you go back and you look at, like, Rakdos and Golgari and Dimir, Join the Dead, the archetype really needs to care about, really needs to care about having removal, and Orzhov is in that space. You want as much removal as you can get. I try to at least, hit the magic number 8, which gives you the 80% chance that you'll have 2 pieces of removal by turn 5 to deal with your opponent's threats. So Join the Dead made the list, and despite it being something that you have to take very early. And now we get into kind of the meat of the draft, where you've opened up your rare, you've picked up your uncommons, and now you're kind of like, okay, I need what are the tools that are left over that go a little bit later in picks 5 and 8. These are your underappreciated uncommons and the commons that you should be looking for. And the top of the list is Tithing Blade, which is great for pairing with snails. If you're playing a snail and you're attacking your opponent's hand, they're less likely to have multiple things on the board, and then the Edict works really well at sniping what your opponent plays. Now, it's a little bit matchup dependent, because if your opponent is playing stuff that creates multiple rectangles, then Tithing Blade, would prefer to kill the big dino that's the lone dino on the board than just snipe a 1/1 token. But then you can flip it into Consuming Sepulture, which gives you some late game inevitability if you are in a really high removal, high control space. Like I mentioned, Skullcap Snail, the 1/1 that makes your opponent discard, pairs particularly nicely with that. And I look for those in the draft if I have, reason to be in black. And then the Synapse Necromage is one that I think is particularly nice with the Orzhov strategy specifically. Not only does it give you additional stuff to sacrifice if you did decide to choose to go that route, but I think more importantly, the 3/1 works nicely on defense, right? It trades into your opponent's 1/1, so it doesn't attack particularly well, but it does trade with the 3/3, and then it gives you 1/1s that you can use later for your shenanigans. And then we've got Miner's Guidewing, which is a 1/1 flying vigilance. When it dies, target creature you control explores. And this is going to be a bit of a longer episode. I'll just get out there and say that now. I try to keep mine under 30 minutes, and I think this one's going to go a little bit long. But there is something that I've learned something specifically this set. And what I learned this set is Miner's Guidewing is a much better pick 5 than it is a pick 1. And so a lot of people will look at like, well, what's the best card in the pack, right? And I think that some of the older drafters tend to look at the rares and the uncommons and then the commons in that order. And I learned kind of why that is. So even if you have like 4 Miner's Guidewings in your deck, it's not necessarily going to give you the chutzpah that you need to get the trophy. It's going to be good, don't get me wrong, right? You can certainly trophy with a deck with 4 Miner's Guidewings in it. But you're more likely to end up in a space that's being cut if you pack one, pick one, a Guidewing. And you're signaling options that, like, the signals that you are sending when you take a common are not as strong as the signals that you're sending when you take a rare and an uncommon. So what I found out is that you can end up in a space where you are prioritizing these cards, these top performing commons, and then you can kind of wind up in a space where you're competing against multiple drafters at the table, and you end up with a very average or even below average deck. And so something just to keep in mind is that, like, Miner's Guidewing is a very good common. It is one of the best commons in the set. But it is better to be taking Miner's Guidewing at pick 5 and is a great signal, right? If you still see these in pick 5, that the white space is open enough to do your strategy. All right, off my off my soapbox. On to the other one. So Visage of the Dread. Learned this set as well that I was mispronouncing Visage. Visage of Dread is a one that I like to look at when I'm doing the Rakdos or the Orzhov space. So if I do not care about Descended, then the Visage of Dread is an interesting card to play because it attacks your opponent's hand as long as you're playing it early. If you're playing it later, it's less likely to hit. And then you can craft with 2 creatures. And if you care about the stuff in your graveyard, if you're doing like the Another Chance and like the Descend space of Dimir and of Golgari, crafting with 2 creatures is a big cost because it's going to negatively affect your Descend space. But this archetype, Chupacabra Echo, is the only card that cares about the Descend space. So it's a pretty good place to do the Dread Osteosaur. And if you are doing the kind of go small, attack your opponent's hand and resources and everything, the Menace works particularly well, the more snails and such that you have. And then Quicksand Whirlpool is removal. You want removal. You want all of the removal. And Quicksand Whirlpool is one that you can take advantage of going late. The 6 cost kind of pushes people away from it unless you are really in a controlling space. And the Quicksand Whirlpool, it exiles a target creature for 6, or it costs 3 less if the creature is tapped. And then Market Gnome, good old Market Gnome. Market Gnome is one that the bots really like taking Market Gnomes. Like if you just leave your computer and your AFK, like Market Gnomes, the bots have no problem auto picking Market Gnome. But people don't really care for the Market Gnome unless they're specifically in a craft kind of go long space. And Orzhov is that. If you are picking up like the clay fired bricks and the saw blades, and the white has some really good mid to late game craft cards. and Market Gnome works particularly well with that. And I think it also does, like, if you're doing the sacrifice thing, sacrificing a Market Gnome is okay too, because you gain a life and draw a card. So it's a pretty good target for things like Fanatical Offering. And then we've got Tinker's Totes, which is 3 cards in 1, and just like any of the archetypes that care about like the crafting, being able to sacrifice this and craft it from your graveyard, it works really well with the other white craft cards. And then it gives you a bunch of fodder for the sacrifice stuff and chumping on the ground while you win in the air. And then we've got Deathcap Marionette, which, like I mentioned, it trades really well as a 1/1 Death Toucher. And unless you have the Chupacabra Echo or the next card we're going to talk about, you can just play it and not self-mill if you don't have a whole lot of those payoffs, or if you've already used those payoffs. But a 1/1 Death Touch trades well 1-for-1. And like I mentioned, that's what we want to be doing. And Defossilize is one... Anytime that you're running because of Another Chance and Deathcap Marionette, both self-mill and are in black, Defossilize package is self-contained. And so anytime that you're running Defossilize, or anytime that you're in black, you can be running Defossilize. And I don't think it works particularly well in this archetype, especially like compared to Golgari, where you have a whole bunch of green beef that you're looking to reanimate. But if you do pick up a Defossilize and you have it, then you want to take the land cycling dinosaurs a little bit more highly. Then you can use like Another Chance and the Marionette to self-mill to find those targets. And then lastly, we've got Vanguard of the Rose, which works pretty well with the Totes and the Synapse Necromage. The more fodder that you have that you can kind of throw into this to fuel it, the better. And but like I said, you want to be really careful about the price that you're paying with your rectangles. And Vanguard of the Rose is one that can quickly chew through all of your resources that you could have better used somewhere else. But if you're tapping 1 to sacrifice a 1/1 to trade with a 3/3, that's worth it, right? And then we've got the value over replacement for picks 8 and onward. And this is a long list, and that's why I was saying there's no way that I'm going to get this done in 30 minutes. But we're gonna go quickly here. So the reason why this list is so long is that when an archetype's win rate is much lower, then you end up with more stuff that is on that list, right? Like if your average archetype win rate is 60%, then your list is going to be really small, and there's going to be very few cards that actually wheel, right? Whereas Orzhov is there's some cards that are dramatically underrated, right? Or underdrafted. So like Fanatical Offering is very common to see on the wheel. Is it an amazing card that's going to win you the game when you play it? Not necessarily, but if you are making sure that it's in your theme, which it fits Orzhov very well, is the top common I'm looking to wheel in the archetype, because it's giving me that card advantage, and I have the sacrifice fodder to fuel it. Similarly, like Mephetic Draft is a card that is unplayable in every other black archetype. It is for Orzhov and Orzhov alone, because you have the ability to sacrifice it to get the draw a card and losing 1 life reward for it. Another Chance is one that, like, if you're in black, you're going to try to wheel Another Chances. So this one's one that, like, if there's another black drafter at the table, you're going to have to compete against it a little bit more. Being able to mill 2 cards and then return 2 cards from your graveyard to your hand is very intriguing for Golgari and for Dimir. A little bit less so for Rakdos and for Orzhov. So you can kind of take it or leave it. I decided to not include it in my draft skeleton, but there are times that I will take the Another Chance because they work particularly well with the Skullcap Snails. And then we've got Hidden Necropolis and Hidden Courtyard, which are the black and white caves. The cave space works pretty well because it's a built-in sacrifice. So if you have Veto, you can sacrifice a cave and gain 2 life. And it's also just like, if you're doing a really controlling attrition-y space, then getting additional value out of your lands is something that you can definitely do in this archetype. Similarly, Primordial Gnar is something that I look to play in Orzhov that I don't look to play in other archetypes, because it works particularly well on defense. It does not attack very well because it trades with the 2/2, but on defense it trades with something with 5 toughness. And then it is also doing the it replaces itself with a Discover 3, which works well with the fact that the majority of the stuff in my deck is already like Discover 1, Discover 2, Discover 3, right? So like this dying into a Marionette is just really good defensively. And then we've got the Soaring Sandwing. I don't actively look to pick these up unless I have like a defossilize, but it's always an intro. You know, it's another flyer, and if we're short on playables, trying to wheel a Soaring Sandwing is definitely one way to do it. Deconstruction Hammer is another card that you can pick up on the wheel. It being able to give one of your flyers +1/+1 and then destroy target artifact or enchantment. It's a very expensive effect to sacrifice your hammer and pay 4 to destroy an artifact or enchantment. So you really want to save these for destroying the key, like really important artifacts, like a inverted iceberg, right? Like you don't want to do this just to destroy anything. So think about it. How much are you paying? What cost are you paying? What's the hidden cost of getting rid of your +1/+1 on your flyer over the course of the game? Ray of Ruin is, like I said, Orzhov is interested in getting as much removal as possible. It plays, I think, a lot like Rakdos does in a lot of other sets, where I just try to prioritize removal over everything else and then see what what I have left over. And so Ray of Ruin is one that you can try to pick up very late on the wheel. You've got a 5-cost exile target creature, vehicle, or non-basic land, scry 1. Something to keep in mind is that Control in general likes cheaper removal, because then you can 2-spell. You can remove your opponent's threat and then also develop the board, whereas 5-cost removal is kind of all you're doing for the turn. So you want to be kind of selective with how many Ray of Ruins you have in your deck. But if you're trying to, get to that magic number 8, this is definitely one of those cards that you can take advantage of. And then the Hoverstone Pilgrim is, if you're leaning more heavily into the Descend space, and doing the marionettes and the another chances, you can chew through your deck pretty quickly and then rebuild it with the Hoverstone Pilgrim. So not every deck is going to want a Hoverstone Pilgrim, but there are some. Anytime that you're in black, like with that self-mill, there's an opportunity there to be to play the Hoverstone Pilgrim. And if you are leaning very heavily into removal and trying to make the game go super long, then the Hoverstone Pilgrim fits into that space pretty well. So you need a couple of things to make this card work, but if you've got those things, then it performs quite well. And then Might of the Ancestors is another one that the more white flyers that you have, the more Might of the Ancestors becomes appealing. And but also the longer that the game is going, the more appealing it is, because you have to take a turn off. If you play this on like turn 3, you're gonna lose. I mean, maybe not guaranteed, but you would rather be developing the board and putting rectangles that can block and interact early on, and then later, when you've got like 6 mana, like putting out a Might of the Ancestors later in the game that makes your flyers more efficient is good. So I think that the more removal that you have to kind of back this up and slow the pace down of the game, then the more you can afford to take a turn off or to spend 3 mana to get the enchantment down. And Sunbird Standard works in this archetype just for finding more flyers. And it's not a space that splashes particularly well, right? Remember, if we look back at the Winds Destroyed, the off-color splashes negatively affect the archetype. But the white flyers is what you're trying to do. So if you're a little bit short on, picking up 7 of the Miner's Guidewings and Cloud Guards and Runelurker Bats and whatnot or whatever, then you can lean into the Sunbird Effigy as kind of a backup plan. Though I don't think that you should be leaning heavily into the Sunbird thing as far as like other colors go. There is an exception, and the exception is if you're doing the cave thing. So Hidden Cataract and Hidden Volcano, blue for the Benthasor and red for the Calamitous Caven. There is always a multicolored cave space. And especially with the Descend mechanics coming from Deathcap Marionette and Another Chance, black works particularly well with the Descend space and caves in general. So I'm not surprised to see the blue and the red caves specifically make it onto the list. And then we've got the Rampaging Spiketail, which similar to the Sandwing, is something that you can look to reanimate off of Defossilize, but I would rather be doing the Sandwing because it fits the flying thing and it fits the go long gain because it gains you life when it enters the battlefield. And then we've got Promising Vein and Hidden Volcano and Captivating Cave, which all go into that cave space. So if you draft like 9+ caves, you can pick up the Bat Colonies in white. If you've got 9+ caves, you can pick up the red Calamitous Caven. If you've got like 6 or so caves, if you got a little bit less, you can pick up like the Benthosaurs. They don't need as many. But yeah, the last little bit is just like keep your mind keep your mind open to the cave space anytime that you are in black, white, red, sometimes green, right? There's a 5-color cave space. Whew. All right, so next week I'll be covering another archetype. We have 3 left before the Murders at Karlov Manor, which comes in early February, and I'll be doing like for every main set, I will be doing a tier list and review, set review, followed by kind of like what are the base mechanics, and then before pre-release, I'll be trying to get my draft skeletons out of just kind of like, this is what I think the archetype is trying to do, and I think these are the commons and uncommons that fit that kind of theme. So look for that coming down the road in February. And remember to hit like and subscribe for more near daily Magic the Gathering content, and place your vote on YouTube for the next archetype. And happy holidays, everybody. Thank you for listening to my ramblings, and thank you so much for being a part of this community. This year has been fantastic, and I'm really looking forward to what next year has in store. So good luck with your games and future trophies. Thank you all for the support, and I will see you next week.